In tonight's Dateline Defense, the new face of NATO. Today, defense ministers approved a new multinational force to beef up defenses against Russia. The new unit will rotate in and out of Eastern European member states rather than being based there. Military members will decide on its composition this spring. Joining me with more is J.D. Gordon, former Navy commander, Pentagon spokesman, and senior fellow at the Center for a Secure Free Society. J.D., tell us more about this new multinational force. How will it work?
Well, the NATO leaders are still working it out, Morris, but it appears to be about a 3,000-person unit, a brigade-sized force that's going to rotate in different parts of Eastern Europe, in the Baltics, Poland, and basically that will deter Russia from more aggression. You know, though, Morris, this is really a continuation, though, of what NATO's already been doing. This isn't new. A couple years ago, the U.S. decided to send 600 troops to rotate on deployments, 120 each to the Baltics and 1 to Poland, and the Germans and Norwegians have been matching that. Plus, we also have a couple dozen aircraft that are from different NATO countries flying out of Estonia and Lithuania in the Baltic. So this is really just a continuation of what NATO's been doing.
Now, Defense Secretary Ash Carter wants to know what NATO can do to deter Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. Earlier this month, the Obama administration made that a priority. It wants to quadruple spending on U.S. troops and training in Europe. Is that the right move, J.D.?
Yes, absolutely, because I think that NATO has to show that they're willing to defend their members. We have Article 5, which calls for the defense of all the members. So I think Russia has been very aggressive towards its neighbors. You know, they occupy part of Georgia now, they occupy part of Ukraine, and there was a real fear that they could go into the Baltics next, and not necessarily send in the tanks, but in places like Latvia and Estonia, with about a 25% native Russian-speaker population, the Russians could basically stage these sham referendums like they had in Ukraine and Crimea. So NATO's getting wise to that, and we're finally sending a strong signal to Russia that they should not mess with the Baltics or any of our NATO allies.
Now let's talk about Montenegro. Some of our viewers might recognize that tiny Balkan nation from its cameo in the James Bond film Casino Royale. Give us a history lesson here. What is Montenegro and why is it important?
I've got a column talking about it in the Washington Times over the weekend. NATO admission must never be free. And basically, Montenegro is a Connecticut-sized country on the Adriatic. Used to be part of Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia broke up, it became part of Serbia. Well, in 2006, it split off from Serbia and it's independent. So NATO has just invited it to join officially, and it could actually become a full-fledged member of NATO by this summer. So that's good in some ways, but it's got some fallbacks too, because it's been very corrupt is the problem with Montenegro. And now American lives are going to be put at risk potentially to defend a very corrupt country, even though it is the right decision to take it into NATO. We just have to help clean up the corruption. Now, you mentioned corruption. There are other significant concerns as well. Tell us more. Well, the Prime Minister has been extremely corrupt. You know, he was running apparently a billion-dollar cigarette money laundering type thing from the Adriatic. You know, there were Italian courts and Swiss courts that had trials. The only reason he didn't get extradited to Italy is because he's the Prime Minister. Wow. So that is a high level of corruption. And so there are also some people there in Montenegro who don't want to become part of NATO, but I think that can be overcome if they really adhere to the rule of law. You know, there was an opposition figure who ran the opposition newspaper. He was gunned down in front of his office in Montenegro. So there are some things like free speech that we have to make sure they're doing, rule of law, and basically cleaning up the corruption. Now, the million-dollar question to me is, does NATO have any teeth? It didn't prevent Russia from annexing Crimea and waging war in Ukraine. Are these moves a signal that things are about to change, as you've talked about, J.D.? Well, I think NATO is going in the right direction, and NATO does have teeth, absolutely. The military budgets are close to $1 trillion a year. That's over 10 times what Vladimir Putin spends. But Vladimir Putin is clearly the aggressor. So are the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans, they're all aggressive. So NATO's got this reputation of somewhat of a gentle giant, if you will. Even though it spends the most and is the most powerful military alliance in the world, what good is that if you're not willing to use the force to defend our values and to defend freedom? So I think NATO has to look at deep inside itself and see what we stand for. Real quick before we go, does it bother you that Turkey's a member of NATO, considering the Turkish problems with other terrorism issues and Russia? Well, you know, it's a mixed bag, because if Turkey's not in NATO, then they're going to be fighting with the Greeks immediately. Right. And so Turkey could pull us into a war that we don't want, though. Absolutely. That's why it's good to have Turkey that's still part of NATO. We just have to try to encourage it to be as helpful as they can be. And we do have a lot of mutual goals in the Middle East as well. I mean, both of us want Bashar al-Assad out of there. And so both of us don't want the Russian influence in the Middle East either. So the U.S. and Turkey do have a strong relationship. We just have to try to make sure that, that they cooperate as best as possible with our mutual goals.
It's always good to have you on the show. J.D. Gordon, Senior Fellow at the Center for a Secure Free Society. Thanks, J.D.
Thanks, Morris.